Olivia Price loved the quiet of late-night walks, never noticing the same gray car parked at the corner each evening. Miles Bennett was the one who found it first, a leather-bound journal abandoned outside his door, filled with detailed notes about Olivia's routines, her home, even the way she slept. I had always felt safe here, safe enough to walk home at night without checking over my shoulder, safe enough to fall asleep with the window cracked open for fresh air. But all of that changed the night I found a newspaper waiting on my doorstep. Something I had never subscribed to, something I hadn't even seen anyone else receive. At first I thought maybe the wind had carried it there, or a neighbor had dropped it by mistake. But as I bent down and picked it up, I saw my own address scrawled across the top corner in thick red ink. The handwriting was messy, hurried, almost childlike, and yet deliberate enough that I knew it was written for me. The front page sent a cold shiver through my body. It was about a string of murders happening in nearby towns. The article described how each victim was found inside their home, locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry. Every single victim had been alone at the time, their bodies discovered days later when the smell began to leak out into the street. The article didn't describe much about the killer. No one had ever seen him, but it explained the strange pattern in his crimes. He always left behind some kind of personal item belonging to the victim in places it didn't belong. A wedding ring placed neatly in the fridge, a driver's license balanced on top of a lampshade, or a photograph hidden inside the pages of a book. Small trophies, almost like the killer was mocking them, showing he could move through their private lives unnoticed. The story was terrifying, but what disturbed me most was how close all of this was to where I lived. These murders weren't happening in some distant city. They were spreading in a circle, creeping closer and closer. And now I was holding a newspaper that I had never ordered, with my name and address written across the top. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself maybe it was some kind of prank, a cruel joke pulled by teenagers with too much time on their hands. But no matter how much I tried to brush it off, a seed of dread planted itself inside my chest and refused to leave. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My house, which had always felt like my safe place, suddenly seemed fragile. Every locked door looked weak. Every window seemed like an invitation. I sat on the couch with the paper still in my hands, my eyes drifting back to the details of the murders again and again. The way the victims had been found, the items left behind, the fact that none of them had seen it coming. The killer had always been inside before they realized the danger. I imagined him standing in the corner of their rooms, watching, waiting, enjoying the silence before striking. When I finally went to bed, sleep felt impossible. Every sound in the house was louder than usual, the groan of the wooden floorboards as the temperature dropped, the tick of the old clock on the wall, the rustle of tree branches against the glass. I stared into the dark, convinced that if I looked away for even a moment, I would see a shadow moving across the floor. My heart wouldn't slow down. The thought that someone had chosen my doorstep for that newspaper haunted me more than the article itself. Out of all the houses in town, it had been mine. Hours passed, and eventually, I must have drifted into a shallow sleep, but it was restless, filled with uneasy images of faceless figures standing over me. When I woke again, the newspaper was still lying on the nightstand where I had left it. Only now, there was something different. I reached for it with trembling hands, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, but I wasn't. On the back of the newspaper, written in the same messy red ink, was my full address again, only this time there was something added beneath it. The single word burned into my mind, written slowly, almost lovingly. It simply said, "Soon." And in that moment I realized the killer wasn't just a story in the news anymore. He was here, and he already knew where to find me. The days after finding that newspaper were a blur of unease, each hour stretching long and heavy as I tried to convince myself nothing was wrong. I wanted to believe that I was overreacting, that maybe the word written in red ink was just some twisted prank. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that my life was no longer my own. Everything seemed touched by an invisible hand. Small things, first my keys, which I always left hanging by the door, were suddenly resting on the kitchen counter. My shoes, placed neatly under my bed, ended up beside the window. First, I thought I was becoming careless, maybe forgetting things in my paranoia. But then it began to happen too often to be an accident. Something, or someone, was moving through my house when I wasn't aware of it. Nights became the worst. The silence pressed in from every corner, so loud it was almost unbearable. I lay in my bed, staring at the shadows that stretched across the ceiling, waiting for them to shift into something that wasn't just my imagination. I began waking up with my window unlatched, though I swore I locked it every night. The chill of the wind against my face in the early hours of morning felt like proof that I was in tea alone. Proof that someone had been there, opening what I thought I had secured. Each time I found the lock undone, my stomach twisted tighter. It was as if whoever was watching me wanted me to know, wanted me to feel the slow burn of terror growing inside me. One night, Unable to shake the thought, I checked every single window and door before going to bed. I counted them, tested each lock twice, pressed my hands against the frames to be sure. When I finally laid down, I forced myself to stay awake, telling myself that if I didn't sleep, I would catch whatever was happening. The hours dragged on, my body screaming for rest, but my mind too wired to let go. At some point, though my eyes betrayed me, sleep pulled me under like quicksand. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilling across the room, my heart dropped straight into my stomach. The window was open again. The curtains swayed with the breeze, and I could almost feel the faint trace of someone's presence still lingering in the air. I stumbled out of bed, my chest tightening, because it was no longer possible to convince myself I had forgotten. It wasn't me, someone else was coming in, someone who knew exactly how to slip inside without leaving a trace. That day I couldn't focus on anything. Every sound outside made me jump. Every passing car made me wonder if I was being watched. I returned to the newspaper again, tracing the names of the victims with my finger, like I could find some hidden clue in them. And then, as if the paper itself wanted me to see it, I noticed something I had overlooked before. The first letter of each victim's name. At first it seemed meaningless, but when I wrote them down in order, my blood ran cold. They spelled out a word, a message. It said, "Next." I sat frozen, staring at the letters until my vision blurred. The killer wasn't random. The killer wasn't just striking wherever he pleased. There was an order, a message, and now it was aimed directly at me. My house, my address, my life, it had already been chosen. My turn was coming, and the thought hollowed me out from the inside. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the dark living room with every light off, my ears straining to catch even the faintest sound. At first, there was nothing, just silence. But after hours of waiting, I heard something so soft, so fragile, I thought I might be imagining it. A faint tap-tap from the walls, almost like fingertips brushing against the wood. The sound moved slowly, from one side of the house to the other, as if someone was circling me, testing, playing with the boundaries of my fear. I held my breath until my lungs burned, terrified that even the sound of me breathing would give me away. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving me in suffocating silence again. I wanted to believe it was the house settling, some trick of an old structure groaning under the weight of time. But deep down I knew it wasn't. It was deliberate. It was a warning. When the first pale light of dawn crept in, I finally dared to move. My legs shook as I walked toward the wall where the sound had been loudest. At first there was nothing unusual, just paint, wood, and the faint chill of morning. But then I noticed something I hadn't seen before, scratched faintly into the paint at knee level, as if carved with a knife tip. It was a single word, jagged and shallow but unmistakable. It said, "Soon." Sleep no longer belonged to me. It had become a luxury I couldn't afford, a dangerous weakness that made me vulnerable to whatever lingered in the corners of my house. My body begged for rest, but every time I closed my eyes, images of faceless figures waiting at the end of my bed filled the darkness. I kept the lights on 4 nights in a row, their harsh glow washing over the walls, but even light could not protect me from the weight of dread. I lived in constant anticipation, convinced that the moment I relaxed would be the moment I was taken. By the 3rd night without real rest, my thoughts began to twist in strange ways. Shadows seemed to ripple when I looked too long, and faint movements at the edge of my vision convinced me I wasn't truly alone. I told myself I was imagining it, the tricks of exhaustion, but deep down I knew something had shifted. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It was like I was trespassing in my own life, and someone else had already claimed the space. That night, as I dragged myself into the kitchen to pour another cup of bitter coffee, I froze. Something was wrong. I stared at the counter for several seconds before realizing what had changed. One of the knives was missing from the wooden block. I checked the sink, the dishwasher, even the trash, hoping I had simply misplaced it while cleaning, but it was gone. The empty slot stared back at me like an open wound, and I felt my stomach turn to stone. I had lived in this house long enough to know every detail of it, and I never misplaced things like that. Someone had taken it, and I didn't need to wonder who. I tried to tell myself to stay calm, that panicking would only make things worse, but every nerve in my body was alive with terror. I set the coffee down untouched, my hands trembling too much to hold it steady. My eyes swept over the kitchen, the hallway, every darkened corner that seemed to stretch deeper than it should. That's when I saw them faint muddy footprints on the linoleum floor. At first I thought maybe I had tracked dirt in earlier without realizing, but the pattern was wrong. They weren't leading inside from the door. They began in the middle of the kitchen and trailed toward the hallway, fading as they reached the carpet. My heart pounded so hard it hurt, each beat echoing in my ears as if the whole house could hear it too. The prints were fresh. Whoever left them had been there recently, maybe even minutes before I entered the room. I followed them only a few steps before I stopped. Some instinct screamed at me not to go further, not to see where they led. Because the answer was one I already knew but wasn't ready to face. If I kept walking, I might find proof that I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, The faint buzz of the lights, the creak of wood beneath my own feet. I pressed myself against the wall and listened, straining to hear something, anything, beyond the noise of the house itself. For a moment, I thought I caught a faint rustle, like fabric brushing against fabric, coming from somewhere upstairs. I didn't go up to check. I couldn't. The thought of climbing those stairs, of walking into whatever was waiting for me in the shadows, was more than I could handle. Instead, I retreated to the living room and sat in the corner, pulling my knees to my chest like a frightened child. Hours passed like that, my eyes locked on the dark mouth of the staircase, waiting for movement, waiting for the sound of steps descending toward me. Nothing came, but the silence was worse than footsteps would have been. Silence meant patience. Silence meant whoever was inside knew I wasn't going anywhere. As dawn finally crept through the curtains, exhaustion won for a moment. My head dipped forward, and I slipped into a shallow doze. When I woke, the house was bright with morning light. Everything looked normal again, too normal, as if the night had been a dream. For a few seconds, I almost believed it was. Then I looked down. Resting neatly on the coffee table in front of me was the missing kitchen knife. Its blade was clean, gleaming in the sunlight, positioned carefully as if placed there for me to find. And beneath it, on a scrap of paper torn from the same newspaper I had found days earlier, was a single word written in jagged, hurried strokes of red ink. It said, "Awake." I stopped pretending that I could keep myself safe. The locks on my doors, the latches on my windows, the heavy furniture I dragged against the entryways, none of it mattered. Whoever was stalking me had already proven they could slip in and out as easily as shadows. Still, I built my barricades like a desperate ritual, shoving chairs under doorknobs and stacking boxes against windows. It gave me something to do with the panic, though deep down I knew it was pointless. My house had become a cage, and I was locking myself inside it. The nights dragged on like endless tunnels, each one darker than the last. My heartbeat became the only sound I could trust, thundering in my ears as I sat awake in the living room. Clutching the flashlight I refused to let go of, I told myself I wouldn't sleep, but fatigue was relentless. My eyelids grew heavy, and every time my head dipped, I imagined waking to find someone standing right above me. Fear was the only thing keeping me conscious, a fear so sharp it cut deeper than exhaustion ever could. Sometime after midnight, when the house was swallowed in silence, I heard it, breathing. Not the steady rhythm of my own chest, but something slower, deeper, coming from the far corner of the room. My body turned to stone. The sound was unmistakable, drawn out and patient, as though whoever it belonged to was savoring the moment. I didn't move. I didn't dare. My mind screamed at me to shine the flashlight toward the sound, but I couldn't bring myself to look. It was worse not knowing, but the thought of confirming it, of seeing him there, was unbearable. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, every second stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. The breathing continued, steady and deliberate, until slowly, almost mercifully, it began to fade. My chest burned from holding my breath, and when I finally inhaled again, the air felt thick and sour, as though something had been stirring it with every exhale. Gathering what little courage I had left, I forced myself to glance toward the corner. The beam of my flashlight cut across the shadows, revealing nothing but empty space. No figure, no intruder, just darkness. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost then I turned back toward the couch and felt the world tilt beneath me. There, resting on my pillow as if it had been waiting all along, was a Polaroid photo. My throat closed as I reached out with trembling fingers, already knowing what I was about to see. The photo showed me lying in bed, eyes closed, blankets pulled tight around me. The angle was wrong for it to be taken from outside. Whoever had captured it had been inside my room, standing close enough to reach out and touch me. I dropped the picture, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Every wall around me felt like it was closing in, pressing tighter, suffocating me. I wanted to run, but where could I go? The world outside was vast and empty, but my stalker had already proven they could find me no matter where I was. My own home was no longer safe, and I had nowhere else. The rest of the night was a blur of panic. I tore through the house, opening closets, checking behind furniture, throwing open cabinet doors like a madman searching for a phantom. Each space was empty, but I felt eyes on me with every movement, the invisible weight of being watched sinking deeper into my skin. I ended up back in my bedroom, staring at the open window that I swore I had locked again. The curtains moved softly in the breeze, swaying like someone's hand had just brushed past them. The sky outside was paling with the first hint of dawn when I finally collapsed into a chair, the Polaroid still lying on the floor beside me. I stared at it, unable to look away. The photo was proof that he had been closer than I could bear to imagine, close enough to stand over me while I slept and leave a piece of himself behind as a cruel reminder. The sun rose, but the light brought no comfort. I felt stripped bare, exposed, as though the daylight only made it easier for him to see me. The barricades I built looked pathetic in the morning glow, useless toys against something I couldn't understand. I had never felt more helpless in my life, and the thought that haunted me more than anything else was simple and undeniable. He wasn't just coming for me, he was already here. and the next time he stepped out of the shadows, I might not wake up at all. The final night arrived without warning, though somewhere deep inside I had been expecting it all along. The air felt heavier than usual, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't push away. I sat in the living room with every light off, my body trembling, the flashlight clutched in my hand like it was the only thing tethering me to safety. I had convinced myself that if I stayed awake, if I kept my eyes open, maybe I could survive until morning. But fear doesn't stop time, and time doesn't stop exhaustion. Every tick of the clock reminded me that I was only delaying what was inevitable. The hours stretched until my muscles ached from sitting still. I watched the shadows ripple across the walls, waiting for them to form into something I couldn't deny. My head bobbed once, twice, and I forced my eyes back open, my heart hammering each time I nearly slipped into sleep. But eventually, my body betrayed me. My eyelids fell, heavy and merciless, and for just a moment, I let go. When I opened my eyes again, the flashlight was gone. My chest tightened in a sharp wave of panic as I scrambled to my feet, the room darker than I had ever seen it. My first instinct was to reach for my phone, but my fingers closed on nothing. It wasn't on the table where I had left it. My stomach twisted and then I saw it, a faint glow on the floor near the far wall. My phone was lying there, the screen lit up, the camera aimed directly at me. Recording, I couldn't move. My breath came in shallow bursts as I stared at that glowing rectangle, realizing what it meant. I hadn't placed it there, someone else had. He wanted me to know that he wasn't just watching me anymore, he was documenting me, collecting me, as if my fear was part of his collection. My eyes darted around the room, desperate for movement, for some sign of where he was. That's when I saw it. A shadow gliding across the wall, too tall and too sharp to be mine. The air grew colder, my body frozen in place as the shadow stretched and shifted, as though it was studying me, savoring every second of my unraveling. I couldn't bring myself to scream. The sound caught in my throat, strangled by terror. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It felt like my body belonged to him now, like I was already caught, already claimed. The glow of my phone suddenly dimmed as the recording stopped. I heard the faint, unmistakable sound of a button being pressed, deliberate and slow. Then silence again, but it wasn't empty, it was full, pulsing, alive with his presence. I knew he was still there, just out of sight, watching as I drowned in the realization that I had nowhere left to go. I don't remember what happened after that moment. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe I finally gave in to the crushing weight of fear. But I do remember the morning light. It spilled into the room with cruel brightness, illuminating everything that should have been familiar but wasn't anymore. The furniture was untouched, the doors still locked, the windows still shut. My phone was back on the table, the battery drained to nothing. It looked ordinary again, harmless, but I knew better. Someone had been there, close enough to touch me, close enough to take everything away, and they had chosen to leave me alive. For now I picked up the phone with shaking hands, hoping maybe I had imagined it, that there would be no evidence. But when the screen flickered back to life, I saw it in my gallery. A new video file. My thumb hovered over it, trembling so violently I almost dropped the device. Finally, I tapped it open. The video showed me in the living room, curled in the corner, my eyes wide and frantic. The camera angle shifted slowly, like someone circling me, savoring every angle of my fear. And then, at the end of the recording, the camera turned, revealing not a face, but a mask. Smooth, pale, with hollow black eyes staring into the lens. For a moment it filled the screen, and then the footage cut to black. I wanted to delete it, to erase the proof, but my hands wouldn't move. I couldn't stop staring at that mask, burned into my mind like a brand. I don't know why he left me alive. I don't know what he's waiting for. But I do know this: someone else will find that footage one day. Maybe it will show up online, passed around as another strange, unexplained video. People will watch it with curiosity, maybe even amusement, never realizing it isn't fiction. And when they do, they'll see me sitting here, trapped in the moment he chose to let me go. And they'll wonder the same thing I do every time I close my eyes. Why hasn't he finished it yet? Why is he still waiting? And most of all, when will he come back to claim me?